Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, another in a series of videos in Crusader Kings 2 where I will be teaching you how to play, well, Crusader Kings 2, but by now you know all this from previous tutorials. So, today we're going to look at troops and the military sort of, I haven't really come up with a name yet, the composition, I guess? Yeah, sure, army composition, that's what we're going to look at today. So, army composition, and I did a tutorial on warfare and on when to engage and how and whatnot. And I think I briefly mentioned the troops there, but today we're going to do a bit of more of an in-depth tutorial on them. Now, the TLDR of it, as always in the beginning, is take the bigger number, smash it into the smaller number, and the bigger number wins. I mean, it's funny, but most of the time it's true. However, there are some intricacies to be looked at, and for that we go to King Rurik of Tutorial Land. Yes, King Rurik of Tutorial Land. So, let us begin. First of all, I'm going to answer the question that will sort of impose itself a little bit later, but I think it's important that we we understand this right now. That is, how can I influence what sort of troops I have at my command in the levy? So you can see that you can raise your personal levy, but you don't really have any option to choose what sort of units to raise. Whether they will be light infantry, heavy infantry, spearmen, horsemen, or light cavalry, heavy cavalry, or archers. The short answer is you can't. Not really. Especially not of sort of what troops your vassals can raise. Literally speaking, you can, because most of these vassals come, or most of these vassals' troops and most of your troops come from upgrades. So, if I were to upgrade a weaponsmith, that's a bad idea. If I were to upgrade a practice range, I would get more archers. However, if you were to look over the holdings themselves, you will notice a general rule of thumb. Tribes generally have more light infantry and archers, whereas castles generally have more heavy infantry and cavalry. They sort of spray a little bit of cavalry in there, but they have all sorts of troops as well. But they have more heavy infantry than light infantry usually. Not all troop types are created equal, especially due to the number that you can wield, that you can field. Sorry, but we're gonna get into that in a bit. First of all, let's talk about retinues. The good/bad thing is, and really depends on how you look at it, is that this doesn't really matter all that much unless you have the Legacy of Rome DLC and retinues. It still does, and there are still having this information about the types of infantry and their qualities and their advantages and disadvantages will help you in the long run, will be useful at one point or another. It's just a hell of a lot more useful with the retinues thing. So, with the retinues thing, what sort of retinue should you build? Well, the tragedy of CK2 is that the entire army composition thing is insanely complicated and yet ultimately falls a little bit useless. Because, objectively speaking, the light skirmisher and skirmisher retinues are the absolute best. Why? Retinue cap usage. Retinue cap usage is a thing that you need to worry about. You can't have a billion retinues. So, if you take a look at the shock retinue, it has 700 retinue cap usage. The defense retinue has 725. The cavalry has 900. Skirmishers, 550. Light skirmisher, 580. I'd actually weigh that the skirmisher retinue is better than this one, simply because it is the cheapest one. You can see, I mean, this is rather hilarious. The housecarl retinue, which is only heavy infantry, which is a culture unique one, but still has 600 cap usage. The more troops you can field as a retinue, the more powerful you are as a king, and the higher the threat threshold is. So discontent vassals will need to gain more support, and there'll need to be more of them, and they will need to have more troops than they usually would if you have a large retinue, and they will need to have a lot more troops than they usually do. So, as far as retinues are concerned, you want the skirmisher retinue most of the time. However, this is not something that's the most influential thing in the entire game, right? So, realistically speaking, you could go for an exclusively culture-focused retinue and just go with it and it will work. Or you can mix them up. But what's the purpose of that, other than, you know, roleplay? Well, I'm happy to report that there is actually a purpose to all this. Let's take a look at the troops individually through this screen, because it shows all the troops, and we'll talk about it. So, combat in CK2 is done in stages. There is a skirmisher phase, a melee phase, a sort of retreat and chase phase. It's done in phases, right? In different phases, different units shine. In the melee phase, well, to nobody's shock, the heavy infantry kicks ass. However, if the enemy's 500 meters away and you're getting hit by arrows, a heavy infantryman with a giant sword is not going to do much. Naturally. So, the two most important phases, well, let's go to 3. But realistically, there's 2 most important phases. The third one is sort of there as more of a utility thing. But the 3 most important phases in CK2 combat is the melee phase, the skirmisher phase, and the chasing down the defeated enemies phase. You can guess which one of these is sort of more utility and long-run useful than the other 2. Yeah, the chasing bit is best done by cavalry. And if you have a lot of the more cavalry you have in the army, the more effective you will be at chasing the enemy down. However, by default, you will chase down a portion of the enemy. You will break them, and when they land on the adjacent province that they're retreating to, they will be left with no morale. So, really, the extra few hundred men that you kill with cavalry here and there doesn't really make that big of a difference, but it does. So cavalry does have its use in that respect. Cavalry is also very good at flanking and stuff like that, but again, that's how combat is conducted on a field of battle, and terrain is king. We talked about this previously. Terrain is absolutely king. If you're fighting a defensive battle, you're going to have an advantage in most situations, unless you're fighting on open plains, in which case, generally speaking, the bigger number defeats the smaller number, unless you're very early on in the game, which is kind of the point of me making this video with tutorial land over here. So, the skirmisher phase is done, as you might expect, exclusively by archers and by another unit type that you can't see here. That's skirmisher artillery. Skirmisher artillery? Oh, I wish we could field artillery. Skirmisher horsemen, available to our friends in this region of the map over here. But you don't have access to them, neither do I, so we won't talk about them. They're basically like skirmishers and archers together. They're basically like archers and cavalry together, sorry. So, take a look at the rest of them. How does skirmishing work? Your archers go forward, fire at the enemy, enemy's archers come forward, they fire at each other, they exchange arrows, right? If you have more archers than the enemy, you're going to be more successful in that stage. How does melee work? Same, just with melee units. The pikemen have their own stats. They're good against cavalry in that they're good again when defending, and they're good against attackers. So if you're holding like a mountain or a river crossing here, pikemen will be more effective. However, there's a problem with this entire thing. With me analysing all these different troops types, is that I could go into the math, which I don't know off the top of my head, but I could look it up and tell you the exact numbers behind the skirmishers and the exact numbers behind the light infantry and how worse they are compared to the heavy infantry, but there's usually more of them. I can go into all of that, but it's useless. Bigger number beats smaller number. most of the time, except in one very rare situation. Well, not very rare, but except in one situation which we will get into. Pragmatically speaking, this doesn't really matter. The phases in combat don't really matter. All that matters is you have more men and the terrain. Right? Those are the only two things that will lead you to victory. The other things you can... I mean, it's an incredibly convoluted system that helps calculate the battle that needs to happen and helps you get to where you need to go, but it's more like a medium than rather the focus of your attention. So, with that said, let's take a look at the one situation where this isn't really the case. Infantry. Heavy and light. Here is, and again, unless you're fighting in a terrain which favors the enemy heavily. If you're fighting on relatively even ground, the army with more heavy infantry will have a noticeable advantage on the field of battle. So, in this situation, I have 467 men, and the problem with using small armies like this is it's more down to RNG. The bigger the army, the less the RNG there is. Well, that's a bit debatable, but RNG plays a lot more heavily with smaller, is factored in a lot more heavily when dealing with smaller armies. Now, here's the thing. If I were to go up against 300 men with roughly the same ratio of archers to infantry, but instead of 41 heavy infantrymen, they had like 200 infantrymen, I would lose the battle, even though I have more men. And, mind you, considering the scale of the forces, I have 460, he has 300, a decent bit more men. Let's take this up a notch. Does it work if we add a 0 on the end of it? Yes and no. No army can field that much heavy infantry. Exclusively, unless it's a retinue that's been prepared, like, years and years ago. Centuries ago, probably. So, it doesn't really work like that. You see the problem? It comes down to the fact that it doesn't matter all too much at the end of it all, right? So, really, why are you even telling us this Juggernaut? Because it factors in a little bit. It factors into skirmishes. We talk about which ones you should get, pragmatically speaking. However, it still kind of remains up to you. There is, like, it influences battles a little bit. Heavy infantry to light infantry ratio influences them noticeably. This happens in one particular type of engagement that you might come across in your games, and that's pagan, Slavic slash Germanic areas of the East fighting against Christians in the West. For example, France has a considerable amount of heavy infantry, and actually the Castle of Melun, the capital of France, is actually a very good way of showing this. They have 205 heavy infantry, 82 light infantry, 62 cavalry. They would probably beat this army due to the fact that they have 200 and something heavy infantry. Right? So, if you're playing as one of the Eastern rulers, quote-unquote, and have a lot of light infantry, bear in mind that you'll need to use terrain, and you'll need to have a considerably larger army than you might think in order to defeat the men in heavy armored suits of the West. Use a bit of a Game of Thrones description and language there. So, equally, if you are a ruler of the West, playing on vanilla CK2, and you start fighting Slavic pagans in the East, bear in mind that even if they have a lot of men, a lot of them are light infantry, and you will be superior to them. Matter of fact, if you mouse over all of these, you can actually see their stats. This is not a hidden thing. But yeah, as you can see, the morale of heavy infantry is doubled. Their attack values are 0.0, 0.6, and 0.1, whereas for light infantry it's 0.1, 0.1, 0. Actually, it's 0.01, 0.01, 0.02, and this is just... I missed a 0 in there. But yeah, basically, that. Their defense values are higher as well, in all aspects, I think. Yeah. So, heavy infantry is just generally better. But then again, the amount of ways you can influence how much of it your country has are limited and yeah, limited. Especially in the east. If we take a look at something like the Byzantines, and I'll jump over to the Basileus, Basilios the monster, alright, that'll only end well. Okay, for 1, play 1700, there we go. So, for most Christian rulers, the building improvement screen, the county improvement screen looks like this. Stables will give you more cavalry, barracks will give you more heavy infantry, keeps will give you more infantry and levy as a whole, and we talked about building upgrades and what to build first, and that still stands. I mean, building a barracks will give you more heavy infantry. That's good, but it's always better to build a keep first, because it will increase the amount of men you have by 15%, which is considerably more than the barracks, plus it'll stack with the barracks later. So in all due honesty, you can't really influence the troop, how should I put it, the, what did I say I was going to call the video again? 40605, there we go. Going back to tutorial land, you can't really influence troop composition or army composition that much at all, really. But understanding the differences between them is important, so whoa, alright. I think we had this discussion in one of the previous videos, turn off your phone when recording. Sorry about that. At any rate, thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Like, subscribe down below if you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions about the army composition, go ahead and let me know. It was a rather quick video, but one that people have been sort of struggling with to understand, and yet basically it comes down to it doesn't influence the world that much, but there are differences, and now you know them and you can use them in certain very limited scenarios. There is one aspect that I haven't talked about, which is Nomad cavalry. Nomad cavalry is unlike any other cavalry in the game in that it's OP as shit, and just God help you with them. You can mouse over the cavalry that you're fighting to see their stats, but listen, Nomads are a pain in the arse if you're fighting against them, and not just because of their cavalry, but because of the way they control territory as well, so... and the fact that they can burn down an entire kingdom in a matter of minutes. So, you know what? That I leave for another video focused on the Nomad. Focused on playing as the Nomads. We can talk about their cavalry then. But as it is, just know that their armies are very, very powerful. That their cavalry armies are very, very powerful. But also know that if you have a terrain advantage, that all doesn't really matter that much. So it comes down to terrain most of the time. But there is a subtle difference between troops, and it becomes less subtle when dealing with stuff like heavy infantry and light infantry. So there you go. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much all you need to know. Thank you very much for watching, like I said already. Until next time, have fun, enjoy CK2, and bye-bye.